So we're spending time today talking about what it means to be successful in your career and how we help really today's students, but also current workers, right, get to career success. But we really can't fully have that conversation without addressing employers. And we have a very illustrious group on the stage today. So I'm not going to go through the introductions. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself, if that's okay. David, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, and we'll be real quick. So my name is David Sue, and I work for an organization called Jobs for the Future. We are a national nonprofit dedicated to the alignment and transformation of the education and workforce systems.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Caitlyn Brazill. I work for another national nonprofit called Scholas, and we do job training and placement in the tech sector for individuals from overlooked communities around the country. And personally, I'm really wondering what my biological age is at the moment. I suspect it is not 15 years younger than my actual age.
I didn't do any push-ups this morning.
Hi there, I'm Jen Stredler. I work for Salesforce, which is a global technology company. For those who don't know, it's a customer relationship management platform that in essence is designed to connect companies and organizations of all types and sizes with their constituents. But I'm here more in the capacity of the work that we do around workforce development, which is both philanthropic and programmatic.
Okay, awesome. So we have a nonprofit intermediary, we have a nonprofit training provider, and then we have an employer and also philanthropists, basically. So I think we have a really diverse set of perspectives to have this conversation. So often we equate the American dream, right, with earning a college degree, for right or for wrong. Why is there a need for alternate pathways to success? And, what should higher ed be doing? What role should they be playing in that conversation? David, do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah,
and I'll just give for a quick bit of context of where I'm coming from. I'm relatively new at JFF. I've been there a little more than 6 months, and I spent the last 7 years at the U.S. Department of Education doing higher education policy broadly, innovation and technology specifically. So I'm certainly a fan of the higher ed system, and I think that there's a lot of really exciting work underway there. But I think as we discussed this morning, there are so many changes afoot in our world and the way that technology and automation are changing our jobs that we're just going to need to be learning throughout our lives. And I will be really interested to see over the next decades how the various actors in the system respond to that. And I think that there's one version of it where higher ed institutions really take over and they say, we're going to really jump into this training, lifelong learning, jump into that and really do that really well. On the other hand, there are a lot of other people and organizations that are trying to get into that game. We have lots of different of the new training providers. There's online, there's the boot camps, there's the workforce system. There are companies themselves, and it's unclear exactly who's gonna win out in that. And I think higher ed institutions have a lot of advantages. They have faculty, they've been doing this for hundreds of years. Faculty are really innovative and nimble in their research. Whether they can move their curriculum in this direction remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. The new training providers that are out there are much more nimble in many cases, but they don't necessarily have the history. Employers are really jumping into the retraining right now when the economy is really strong, but who knows where that's going to go. So I say this all to say that I think there's a lot of uncertainty as to who is going to be doing this education and training in the future, but there's a lot of people that have a seat at the table.
Yep, I agree with that. It struck me as we were sort of talking, I want to make sure that we're all on the same accord here. What exactly do we mean by alternative or diverse pathways? What does that mean? Caitlyn, do you want to maybe explain that for everyone?
I would be happy to, since we are one, so I feel uniquely situated. So maybe I'll just give a little background on who Scholas is and what we do, and sort of situate that among what we mean by alternative pathways for talent. So Scholas is an immersive training model. We recruit adults from overlooked communities into our program. We look for people who have at least a high school diploma. We look for people who are passionate about technology, who have an aptitude. Maybe they were the person who figured out how to fix iPhone screens and have been doing it for $50, right? And they come into our program, which is an immersive, depending on the training track, somewhere between 12 to 15 to actually somewhere even as long as 18 weeks of full-time intensive technical training integrated with professional business skills. And we design our curriculum, it is updated at least on an annual basis, often more frequently. We are directly training for skill sets and competencies that employers are looking for. And the reason we know that to be the case is that we have a business solutions team in every market that are working with collectively 800 employers around the country to place our graduates into employment within those companies. And so we have this incredible feedback loop in real time where employers come back to us and say, hey, you know, I thought she was going to know how to do this, or I thought this programming language was what you would teach, and it's not, and that's what I need, right? And so that's how we ensure that we are keeping up with what employers' needs are and that we're teaching the most relevant skills. And I think, you know, as we think about, so what does it mean for an alternative talent pipeline, right? When we work with companies, I mean, our graduates are 85% people of color, almost exclusively come from low and moderate income households, come from low and moderate income communities. When they come to us, our median student age is 30, right? So they are more than a decade out of high school. They usually have some college credits, but no degree. They usually have some college debt. And so thinking about your question of like, what are the roles for higher ed and alternative talent pipelines, right? I think that there are incredible possibilities for collaboration, right? This model that we've developed has some unique features, right? You're basically asking people to put their whole lives on hold to absorb what's probably about 2 years of information in a really short timetable. That's not easy for colleges to adapt to, right? So thinking about how you can take the lessons that we've learned from this model, which has now been studied through 2 randomized controlled trials and found to be effective for long-term earnings, life satisfaction, and translate that to the scale that we can achieve with higher education.
I love that. David, you said something that I'm still sort of grappling with in my brain, which is there's lots of stakeholders, right? And who will be at the table? Will it be higher ed institutions? Will it be high schools? Will it be nonprofits? Will it be corporate entities? Jen, I'm curious from your perspective at Salesforce what that looks like inside a large global corporation. How do you approach developing your workforce?
Yeah, so I sort of sit in this role, and at this table, I would say kind of wearing 2 hats in my role. I don't lead HR, I don't work in HR, but I very much feel like I and we are here representing kind of employer with one hat, and on the philanthropy side, as you said, with another. And so I can talk about how we really think and approach this, wearing both of those hats. So I think we think about it as both thinking about this issue and pathways to employment and who has access to jobs and opportunity as both a business and a moral imperative. This is not just the nice or the right thing to do. There's lots of statistics we could use in this conversation, but 2 that I think are interesting. There are 12 million jobs in the U.S. alone, so just forget about the global context, that's even more complicated. But 12 million jobs open now that require some sort of post-secondary credential, but not necessarily a degree. There are 5 million young adults who are disconnected from the labor market and who would love those jobs and can't figure out how to get them. And so we clearly have a gap. And I think the business imperative here is talent. So, you know, we, not Salesforce specifically, but we, employers, companies, need to think differently about how we source talent. And even if we individually don't have a sort of talent gap right now, those wells, the traditional wells, will run dry. And so, I think there's a business obligation to think differently about how we hire. Now, there's also a need to figure out, you can't just go take those 5 million young adults and with no training, assume that they're going to be successful in the role. And so that's why organizations like JFF and Scholas are so critical to the ecosystem. But I think, the sheer need for talent is part of the business need here. And also there's a huge business case, of course, for needing diverse talent. The other side is what I would call a moral imperative. And again, it's not just the right thing to do, but I think we in this country have a completely overlooked subpopulation that deserves access to opportunity. And that's really where more of our philanthropic work comes in. So the K-12 system is not working for every young person in this country. And we need not non-traditional pathways, because I don't think we want to make a judgment about what's traditional or what's the right pathway, but diverse pathways and second chances for young people who maybe weren't successful for reasons not that were their own fault. And so I would say these are the sort of dynamics that we try to navigate, both as an employer and then also in our philanthropy.
I love that. So it seems that, and I work for a for-profit entity, it seems that employers understand that there are leaks in the talent pipeline, right? But also, as someone that works inside of a for-profit entity, we don't always know how to address those leaks. So I'm curious, particularly for David and for Caitlyn, how you can help as being a part of that ecosystem. So, David, with your policy background, how does JFF approach partners and sort of helping them get ready for this paradigm change?
Yeah, well, I'll actually talk first about some work that we're doing with corporations, because JFF has worked with corporations for years. It's been a big part of the work that we've done. But I think that there's been a real uptick in the last several months or the last couple of years of employers that are saying exactly what Jen was just saying, that we have both a moral imperative to really help our workers succeed and have economic advancement, but it's also a business imperative. And so we've been, over the last several months, putting together a body of work around that, and we've released something earlier this year called the Impact Employer Framework, and it talks about 6 different levers that employers can pull to improve. So it's everything from the way that you onboard and bring in talent, upskilling that you do, to ethically offboarding people when it is time for them to leave the company. And there's been a lot of really good interest from companies coming to us saying, we really want to be a part of this. And so I think for the non-traditional pathways or alternative, other different many pathways conversation, the talent acquisition one is really relevant. And so in our framework, which you can find on our website, we highlight IBM, which I know we have a colleague from here, but IBM doing away with degree requirements for hiring and really trying to move towards skill-based hiring. And I know it's not as easy as just doing that, but that's the first step. And another one in there is Unilever. And Unilever previously had recruited only at job fairs, and they found that they were getting a very small, narrow, homogenous set of people that they were hiring, many men, for a company that has a lot of products marketed to females. And so they've changed the way that they've done hiring, and you can hire using your LinkedIn profile and some skills-based assessments that you do online. And that has given them a wider candidate pool to recruit from. So there's just been an increase in new approaches that we're seeing companies wanting to try, and there's just been an outpouring of interest from companies coming to JFF saying, we'd love to learn more about this. And so we're actually hosting a meeting next week in New York. I think, Jen, you'll be there, at JP Morgan Chase headquarters with a bunch of companies that are going to come and compare notes on how this work is done. And just one other note that I'll make on the skill-based hiring and the assessments space. This was something when I was in government during the Obama administration, I think in 2012, 2013, somewhere in that ballpark. People were super excited about it. It's if we could just figure out what the competencies are that the people have, we can figure out how to hire against them. but there weren't a lot of companies that were doing that in like new and dynamic ways, and so it sort of, we did a couple of like convenings or whatnot about it, but it didn't really go too far. We've really seen in the last couple of years a lot of dynamism in that space, and so JFF is going to be putting together an acceleration cohort for mission-aligned startups that are in that space, and we got interest from like dozens and dozens of these startups that are trying to do skill-based hiring, and I'm not going to promise that anyone has the answer yet, but I just think it is really interesting that there's a lot of energy now in moving to these new ways of doing hiring and talent acquisition that I don't think we were seeing a few years ago.
And do you want to articulate, just to make sure everyone understands, what you mean by competency-based hiring?
Yeah, so I guess the contrast of it is like degree-based or resume-based, where it's like, you see, I went to XYZ fancy school,
right,
therefore you should hire me. And instead saying, these are the skills, competencies that I have. And, these can include, as Brendan Busty was saying this morning, like the soft skills, hard skills, we can quibble with what exactly should be on that,
yeah,
but it's looking at those skills and competencies rather than the, brand.
Yeah, and when we think about trying to increase diverse talent, that becomes critical, right? So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I think the other way that companies, and we also heard this morning this issue of like people are getting creative when they really are getting desperate for talent.
Yeah.
We've been able to, over the last couple of years, create partnerships with a number of corporations where we're actually designing customized pre-employment training. So we're going to a company that knows that they can, let's say over the next 18 months, they're probably going to hire 40 data engineers, and they would like that pipeline of applicants to be a much more diverse set of applicants than they'll see if they just recruit at the same 25 schools that they've been recruiting at for the last, 5-7 years. Mm-hmm. So they will work with Scholas, will design a curriculum specific to their needs. So using the platforms that they use, using the programming languages that they use, et cetera, even incorporating some components of corporate culture. They'll come in and do mock interviews with students. They have insights into the assessments that students complete throughout that process. And at the end, they get first access to those graduates and are able to interview them, often even before graduation, and slot them into particular roles. And so that model of forecasting and thinking out, okay, well, we know this is where our talent is going, is I think the kinds of things that, you're talking about JPMC, they're another one of the companies that has been thinking about how they can identify where there are opportunities that they know they'll be hiring for positions, and rather than just waiting for that talent to appear, they're making the investment to try to make it appear much more diverse than it will otherwise.
Right. I'm always struck by those statistics that come out at various points of the year that say, X percentage of employers don't believe that their recent graduate hires have critical thinking skills or can communicate orally well. And so then you get into this sort of discussion and debate around, well then, okay, well, what can educational institutions do to then better prepare students? Jen, I'm curious, what can we share from an employer perspective about some of the things that, you're looking for?
Sure. So I think sort of shifting practice, I'll try to make this sort of response tangible, because I think we all have an interest in a more diverse workforce, but the work is really hard. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of work to do, but we've also learned along the way from things we've done, from things that have worked, from things that haven't worked. I think the first thing I would say is that this is not not one person, but not even one team's work. This work can't sit in and only be owned by an HR function. We can't put all the responsibility on hiring managers. Frankly, I don't even think sort of a top-down mandate from a CEO without further deep investment really can move the needle. I think this has to be like a systemic effort inside of a company. And just reflecting on some of the things that we've done and we've tried and where I think we still need to go, a few sort of keys to success or things that I think are really important. I think the work and the costs associated with it and the process of interviewing differently and hiring differently and training differently, like really, this may sound obvious, but it's amazing how many times I've heard this not be the case, it can't be funded through philanthropy. It has to be funded through the business that needs the talent. This is a core cost to business units. And then I think sort of related to that is and I don't think this sort of topic has come up today, but this idea of equity or equality. And so I think we have to make sure that we hire people from diverse pathways with an equity lens. They will need different supports than someone who's coming in straight out of an undergrad or with experience and social capital and networks that, you know, their peers might not have. And so this idea of everyone's going to start on day one and go through the same training program and have the same onboarding, we have to meet people where they are. And it reminds me, I'm sure some of you have seen the picture of the people looking over the fence. I think it's like a baseball game, and the steps. And if you put everyone on the same step, the person who's taller is going to be able to see right over, and the person who's shorter is not. And so we have to make sure that employers, along with partners like JFF and Scholas, but that employers are taking responsibility for building the right steps. And then I think the last thing I would say, again, I think we all have a lot of work to do here, is that we've talked a lot about recruiting and about how we bring diverse talent in, but recruiting is the beginning of this story. It's not the end. And so how do we also focus on inclusion, belonging, cultural competency on teams, advancement for people coming from diverse pathways? So, you know, there's no shame in really focusing on the recruiting piece because we all have to start somewhere, but we can't pat ourselves on the back too much once we feel like we've moved the needle on recruiting, because I think we're only just getting started.
And I think a part of it, and forgive me, but I think a part of it also is helping our students, to level set their expectations about the world that they are entering in, right? And helping them to understand that there isn't one path, right? There's many ways to get to where you want to go. We started talking about concrete examples earlier this morning, and I wondered if we wanted to unpack some of those ways. So apprenticeships as one example, and I think it was Dr. DeLong who talked about your personal experience with your son and how, maybe we need to rebrand it, right? Perhaps it's just the sound of it that is turning off today's students. I wondered if any of you had any comment on apprenticeships in general and what that could mean as a pathway.
Sure, I'll take that.
Okay.
And I just wanted to also add to what Jen was just talking about. I think one of the other ways that we see many of our corporate partners, Salesforce included, actually thinking about both ways to help a diverse talent pipeline prepare for the workforce, as well as to engage their current employees, is through volunteerism and employee engagement, right? So we have folks from every company that we work with in our office multiple times a week doing things like mock interviews and lunch and learns and talking to our students about their own employment history and pathways. And those relationships and those conversations are really valuable both to the students but also to the employees of that company, who now recognize that their employer has made this investment, start to see different opportunities and make their own hiring decisions down the line that may shape differently. I think when it comes to apprenticeships, and we have some experience with unregistered, not the real deal apprenticeships, where we've seen incredible impact is when we can work with a company and they identify that there are specific barriers to really bringing in entry-level talent in a particular unit. So for example, we worked with a major bank that wanted to bring on talent in cybersecurity, and basically they didn't have an entry-level role. There was no associates in their cybersecurity division. And so we worked with them to develop an apprenticeship program. We did the training. And then when individuals would transition into the company, they had 2 years of being an apprentice, which, they were full-time employees with benefits. They were real employees at the company, but they had a mentor and an expectation that they would have learning milestones as well as performance milestones. And at the end of 2 years, literally 100% of them converted into full-time employees. We continue to have this really strong relationship. They've now hired more than 50 of our graduates. I think that kind of model is something that can easily be replicated across companies.
Jen, did you have any other color to add there from your perspective?
I think Caitlyn's point around, apprenticeship being super structured is part of this came up this morning too, is part of why it has been challenging to sort of take root in the U.S. in fields that are beyond the trades.
Yep.
Our most significant apprenticeship programs are not in the U.S., probably for that reason. And so we have some apprenticeship programs in London. The UK has some really strong infrastructure around apprenticeship that makes it much more just embedded in business, and it's also much less stigmatized. But we are doing some work in the US to try to help bring some of the rigor and best practice in apprenticeship to the US and into new fields. And part of that work is actually some of what we're supporting Jobs for the Future to do. Last year, they established the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, which is really designed to help employers, education providers, nonprofit training providers build their own capacity to do apprenticeship. And so it's really tackling exactly what we're saying, which is that you can't just snap your fingers and set up an apprenticeship program. And so entities need support to be able to do that. There's also, for those of you who may work in Chicago or hire people in Chicago, there's a great apprenticeship initiative happening there where the funders have really kind of convened. There's a really strong partnership with the community college system. And so I do see the tide changing. But I also think the infrastructure, it's a real investment for companies. I agree completely. I can't remember who said it this morning, that there's this perception that it's a cost. And I think there is upfront cost, but to me, there is no doubt that the ROI on that is really positive, but it will take real commitment. This can't be like a side of desk little project for someone.
Yeah, and I will say that, JFF is doing really great work in the apprenticeship space that I'm not going to take any credit for. But the other thing that I think is interesting about it is that we're not only working with companies to try to help set up their apprenticeships, we're also working on the policy side to try to educate policymakers about what apprenticeships are and make the case for why they should be funded more. And so I think that that's another strategy that we're trying to employ, is working across multiple domains. And the only other thing I would say about the perception issue about, I think, the diverse pathways, and I think Danette really spoke to it really well this morning, is we really need to make sure that if we are steering people towards other pathways, that they really are legitimate and that they really are something that's valuable. And we can't, and as I was saying to her afterwards, I was like, if I were advising a low-income person, young person who's 17, 16 right now, I would probably tell them to get a degree, because that is the most, that's how you're going to get ahead in today's economy. I hope that in 10 years or 20 years that I wouldn't have to say that, and that there are multiple other pathways that are demonstrated to be really a path to a sustaining family wage, but I don't necessarily know if that's the case at the moment. And so I think that we need to have a broader national dialogue about that point and figure out how we're going to legitimate these pathways. Otherwise, we are risking that two-tiered system that she talked about.
I think that's a great point. So I have a little game for you as our sort of concluding moment. I'm calling it Future Headlines Today, a la Jimmy Fallon or something. So future headlines today. So if we could unpack the headlines 5 years in the future around employment and the future of work, what would they read? Who wants to start?
I can start, but I will fess up that I think it's really ambitious to think that this headline is in 5 years. I think I might need to borrow a little more time. But the headline that I think we sort of dream of for the work is that the employee population of Fortune 500 companies in the US mirrors the population of our communities across job level. We've got a long way to go, but...
Okay, so that's long for a headline, Jen.
It is long for a headline.
All right.
But mine was right around the same idea, just a much more abbreviated version. And I'm thinking Raj Shetty here, and basically, opportunity index improves, right? I think what we want to see is that trajectories for people who are born and raised in low and moderate income neighborhoods start to change, and that people are able to access opportunities in the labor market, regardless of the school where they went to elementary school or the college that they attended.
How are you going to top that, David?
Well, I'm not a good headline writer, but I'm just going to put a plug in for skills-based hiring. Skills-based hiring is a thing that actually works.
Thank you, David, Caitlyn, and Jen. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.